Mychal. I'm a sommelier, tarot card reader, and former ballerina.
I'm Suzanne. I am a writer, an author, and a podcaster.
And this is All the Woo, A to Z.
And we are here in our first, what we're calling Seasonettes.
Yes,
This is the September Seasonette, which is going to be all about astrology.
astrology. We had a few comments from listeners, thank you, who had commented, and we knew this as well, that there were certain subjects that we had discussed in our first season that they would have liked to have had fleshed out a little bit more. And astrology was one of those topics. So here we are.
Here we are to flesh it out. First thing is, we want you to know this is a safe space and you are invited to join us at this metaphysical table and listen to our experiences and our perceptions. And we hope that you get something out of it. And if nothing else, you're entertained.
I like the entertaining part, for sure.
Entertaining is good. So what are we drinking?
So today, just like with the astrology episode for season 1, I wanted to go with a biodynamic wine because of how it's made and that astrology, there's a close correlation with this. But now I decided to take it a step further. So bear with me as I try to not butcher the name of the wine itself.
She is doubling down on the meta here.
I am. So first with the name. It is Nittnaus, Anita und Hans Lange on Blaufkrankisch. That is from the Litaberg, and this is in Austria, in case you couldn't pick that up. All right, now that I've said all of that.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
One more time. Just one more time. So the kind of wine that it is, it's a Blaufkrankisch. So just like you'd have a Chardonnay or Cabernet, Blaufkrankisch is what this is. It is a red wine. It drinks a lot like a Pinot Noir. To kind of give you an idea, that is, I think, probably the closest, most common thing that you could liken it to. And the reason why I chose this wine is I wanted to read the description of tasting notes that somebody from Wine Enthusiast, a wine magazine, has written about this wine. And what I wanted to kind of show, or I don't know, kind of use it as an example, is how just like you would hire a professional astrologer to read your chart, that even though all the same information is there, if you go get a reading from another astrologer, what they might give you will be probably still along the same lines, but a little bit different because of what it is that they're picking up and what stands out to them. The same is true in wine interpretation. So that being said, I wanted to read their notes here. It says, a pure and refined red with flavors of damson plum, cassis, and dark chocolate. A buoyant acidity flows through, providing vibrancy and lift, which give an elegant impression overall. It does have nice extraction, but its poise is unmatched. The lingering sanguine echo on the finish extends like a Miles Davis trumpet. This will cellar so nicely, but it is quite irresistible now. And this is written by Aleks, Zecevic. I hope I'm pronouncing their name right. But in comparison, like, he gets very, poetic with his wording. But the things that stood out to him were the cassis and the chocolate and the plum, and where somebody else might just say, oh, well, it has dark fruits, black fruits, but still light in body. Like, there's different ways of explaining things. And so that was something that I wanted to kind of make that correlation between the two and how it can be very similar. All right, that's my very long wine pairing for today.
But I think that that's valid, is anytime you are going to a professional for something that is not a black and white kind of topic,
yes,
that you are going for their insight through their particular lens. And his poetic lens is probably one of the reasons why he's writing for Wine Enthusiast. Or
true.
Yeah.
I would think so.
As opposed to, it's red, tastes good, buy lots.
It's like Pinot Noir, and it's good. There you go.
It's an Austrian Pinot Noir.
Yes.
And gentle listener, I am just saying words. I have no idea. So just enjoying the wine. So there are many different kinds of astrology, but what they have in common is that they are all interpretations of the planets that somehow affect us on Earth.
Yes.
Broadly
Absolutely.
speaking.
Yes.
So Michael has the advantage of having grown up with astrology.
Yes.
So, what was your very first reading like? How old were you? And for just to get really, really simplistic, a
Mhm.
reading is when a professional looks at the chart, which is some sort of visual interpretation of where the planets were when you were born.
Yes.
And depending on the path of interpretation they choose,
Mhm.
they tell you things about yourself and your
Yes.
life.
Yes.
And so, how old were you when you got your first reading?
I'm trying to remember. I think I was either 14 or 15. I'm thinking 15 based upon I remember what my 14th birthday present was. It was a birthday present
Okay.
from my parents, and the person who did the reading has known me literally my entire life because he was a hairdresser for my
Mhm.
mother
Mhm.
when she was pregnant with me,
Oh,
even
wow.
before then.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so he also, had done astrology. I don't know if you want to say side job or whatever, but however you want to look at it,
The
right?
stars are my side hustle.
Yes, I know. So that is why my parents started getting astrology readings.
Okay.
At least I'm guessing. I assume
Mhm.
that that was the case. So this was a present for me, and the way that he does it, he uses Koch, so Koch
Mhm.
is how it's spelled if I'm not pronouncing it correctly, and he uses tropical, and he'll do two different kinds of charts. One is the birth chart,
Mhm.
and then he'll do another what's called a progressed chart
Mhm.
to kind of see where you are now to give you more information of like this is the base of who you are as a person, and then this is kind of what you're working on now.
Mhm.
So that is how he typically will do it. He also works with on a metaphysical level. He says that he tunes in with his guides and your guides to try to figure out what is the best interpretation of the information and how
Mhm.
best to deliver that information to you.
Mhm.
And so the kind of information that he gave was honestly, I still remember a lot of the things that he told me from that very first. I mean, it stuck with me as far
Sure, yeah.
as explaining a lot of who I was as a person, making a lot of correlations and distinctions of difference between myself and my parents, like how my
Mhm.
parents have learned life versus how my experience would be different than theirs.
Mhm.
And then also, like one thing I always try to remember garnered from my chart is that he's like when you were in your mother's womb, you were very excited to be born because she was taking such good care of you. Like she's probably taking a lot of vitamins and things like that,
Wow.
and that you were very excited for what you had planned in life.
Okay.
And that is something that I still try to remind myself of, especially when things are harder.
Mhm.
Is like, I was really excited about this. I need to remember that I was super excited. So, like, I was excited for something, which means that whatever I'm going through right now cannot be the end all be all of what my life is about.
How incredibly encouraging.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. But he gave a lot of information, and that's when I started to learn all the different kinds of things that could be pulled out, and I didn't really understand certain things. Like he would get into a little bit of astrology jargon that the more I learn about astrology, it makes sense. Like
Mhm.
I'm a Virgo, but I'm a progressed Gemini or, something like that.
And so when she's saying progressed, what she's referring to is there is a degree in the sign in which you were born,
Mhm.
but then you move a degree for every year you're alive.
Mhm.
And so every year you're a different degree, and then every 30 years you become a different sign.
Mhm.
And so that is so when people are, so proud to be Taurus or whatever, but they're 65 years old and it's like, dude.
You're not a Taurus anymore, really. I mean, at heart, you are. There's a part of you that's like your baseline, that is, but the way that you act and the way that you operate is not really so much that anymore.
And that's, it's one of the things I love about astrology is that it is always forward moving. It is all about progression and growth and change and opportunity
Yes.
and how to leverage your own self understanding
Hmm.
in order to facilitate those things as best as possible.
Yes. And so I have gotten readings from him many times, and even still,
Hmm.
I'll still check in with him and get a reading. Even though now I'd like to get readings from a lot of other people, just
Hmm.
because I want to see a different perspective.
She likes to crowdsource.
I do. Well, I think we've discussed this in general. I think information that I give, whether it be like if I get psychic information from people, I'm like, well, we'll just crowdsource on this one and we'll see where the information overlaps. But I enjoy others' perspectives
Hmm.
and kind of, I don't know, I find that fascinating.
Hmm.
Hmm. And how about you, Suzanne?
Well, although I loved astrology, but did not participate in it really
Hmm.
until very recently, and then had just been working overtime to
Yeah, you've
make up.
really dived into the deep end of the pool.
Just kind of like, okay, so this is one reading, and let me get another reading.
Yes.
But the other thing is that I don't think I realized the combination of excitement,
Hmm.
but then how you can just hear so much information and just after a while you like glaze over no matter how much you want to hear because you're digesting actual like I don't know, messages from beyond, if you will, that are
Hmm.
being brought to you through what somebody sees in your chart. And after a point, it's just like, okay, I'm really glad that we've recorded this because
I do the same thing. I think we were discussing the other day that there's all this information that's come out, especially because as we're recording this, we're coming to a pretty intense time, according to astrology, within the next 2 weeks. And I know I should be looking and reading all the astrology that there is to feel prepared or, to prep myself as much as I can so that I'm able to tackle the information. But for whatever reason, for the past week or two, my brain has just not been able to, when I've listened to it, I just cannot compute.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I don't know what it is, except for apparently I'm just not supposed to
Yeah.
know it right now or whatever may
Mhm.
be the case. I'm not sure. But I kind of liken it to when you're eating a meal and you just get full. You're like, I just can't.
Mhm.
It's like your brain shuts off. It's
Mhm.
just like
It's like there's too much fettuccine alfredo we can't anymore.
and then
We've
it
maxed out.
then it becomes like peanuts, the parrots on peanuts, like wah 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 wah
It's just
wah
like
wah wah.
I need a nap.
Yeah, like I can't.
So that said, I have had a true sidereal
Mm-hmm.
astrology reading, which I don't think that you've done.
No.
So one of the fascinating things for me about the true sidereal is that so I go into it with my Western slash tropical understanding of what my sign is and what have you,
Mm-hmm.
and then discover in true sidereal that I am in fact in that interpretation an entirely different sign.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think one of the really interesting things about doing all of these different, and then I also, gave myself a draconic reading, which is supposed to be your chart for your soul's journey. So,
Yes.
like what your soul really is. But in all of these, I have a very distinct shape in or of my natal chart
Mm-hmm.
and no matter where I go, what kind of interpretation, and I have had readings also because I have a really early degree in a
Mm-hmm.
house in my sign, which can also be a very late degree in the house before, or it can be a middle degree in the house after. So there's a spectrum
Mm-hmm.
that really can fit, but the shape remains the same
Yes.
and the planets remain the same.
Yes.
So no matter where I go, like Pluto and Uranus are still the two most powerful planets in
Mm-hmm.
my chart. So but looking at the different houses and the different signs, I feel like my self understanding on an astrological level has become much more dimensional.
Mhm.
Like, one of those figures that's sort of spinning around and you see it in 2 dimensions, and then all of a sudden it's and has become 3 dimensions. And it's like, for that, it feels very, very accurate.
Yes.
And also, I think the important thing as you are doing all of this, gentle listener, is that whatever it is you hear that really is for you, it almost rings.
Mhm.
Like there's an authenticity that kind of clicks inside you. And so you're like, oh, yes, that's true. And so always felt that I had this kind of spectrum inside me.
Yeah.
And I used to explain it as a cusp. And then they were like, there's no such thing as a cusp. And I was like, but it's still true. And then to go to these different readings and be like, oh, it really is still true.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, on the other side of things, for whatever reason this popped up, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna say it, is that I have had a reading, only one reading from somebody that the information that they gave me overall, I was disappointed, but there was one thing in particular that they interpreted, that their interpretation I felt was very incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you know exactly what it is that I'm
Mm-hmm.
referring to. I was kind of mad about it. Actually, I'm like, that is so wrong. And they're not looking at this information and this information.
But I feel that by your violence isn't the right word, but
My rage.
but the authority that called up inside you,
Yeah.
that it was a confirmation
Mhm.
of, no, I actually do know the truth. And I think sometimes, especially for certain personality types, that being told one thing helps us identify, no, it's the opposite.
Yes. No, absolutely. And I'm going to say, out of all of the readings that I have had, and I have had a lot, a lot.
For some of us, this is a little bit of a hobby.
Yeah. That keeping that in mind, the only reason why I say this is because that's the only time that I've had a reading where there was something that was just so very missing, like the emphasis was put in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I guess, the rarity of that happening
Mm-hmm.
is what is to note there, how
Mm-hmm.
rare that was. And that was because of just that one person's interpretation of my chart, and that they weren't paying attention to some other elements, and probably mostly just spoke to their, probably could have used a little bit more experience in reading charts, that they had missed that.
Mm-hmm.
We're all human. And so not necessarily, I'm not trying to be upset with that person and say that they're wrong. Like, no, they just didn't fully understand. So,
Mm-hmm. Sure.
and I know that sometimes, especially when people are unfamiliar with astrology and they look at, especially just the straight up, oh, my sun sign and the description of that sign, sometimes not everything in that sign is going to encompass everything that you are. There may be some things, for reasons that there's other stuff in your chart that you're not aware of, that changes that a little bit, right? That has an influence that draws away from how meticulous you are, or how easy it is for you to relax, or whatever it may be. Those things get morphed based upon other things that are in your chart. So,
And I would say, especially if you're just starting out in this, one of the things is that, at least my experience was, it was kind of like a rainfall.
mhm.
Like I can only absorb so much at a time, but if I keep myself in a place where I'm hearing it constantly,
Yes.
then I will learn as I go.
Mhm.
And then I will be able to go back to readings and understand what they said, as opposed to getting 10% or 15%, and then be able to glean as the year goes on.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, okay, this is what they said about, July to September. It's kind of like, oh, oh, yeah, okay. And I think more than anything, and I think I actually mentioned this in season 1, is looking at my own life biography
Mhm.
and looking at my astrology and seeing how my life happened as my chart unfolded. Like it confirmed
Yeah.
astrology for me. So I didn't have to be convinced in any way.
Mhm.
And that makes me just want to dive deeper. But to the point you were saying of somebody misinterpreting or not going deep enough, I've had experience, not many, but I have had moments where it was like, no, that, and it did make me angry.
Yeah.
But again, to this rainfall kind of thing,
Mhm.
the longer that it took and the more that I thought about it, the more I was like, actually, well, drat.
Yeah.
I don't want that to be true, but that's actually so painfully true that I just immediately rejected it.
Mhm.
And it took a minute or a month
Yeah.
to sink in.
Yeah.
So it can go all different kinds of ways. But I think what you really are trying to do when you go for a reading is to find a confirmation in yourself.
Mhm. I think it gives some clarity to some parts of yourself that maybe you weren't fully aware of before or didn't know how to voice
It's kind of like
before.
getting a look at the back of your head. Like
Yes.
there's no other way that you really can.
Mhm.
And if my voice vanished to
'Cause
different
she's looking
directions, I was
looking to side to
I was
side.
demonstrating.
Yes.
But and so you go to a mirror and it's like, oh, that's what the back of my head looks like.
Yeah, and I think that that's a lot of how it should be utilized, and I think that one of the reasons why I had gotten so upset about that is because this person, I had no interaction. This was a recorded reading. They had never
Mhm.
met me before,
Mhm.
and I couldn't even, like, speak up for myself to be like, "No, that is not." It was such a to think that somebody saw me that way potentially, right, was very I was very offended. Would be the way to kinda say it. And but overall, I mean, that's what astrology is supposed to be for, is to point out certain things to you, not only to in a way, it helps you feel like you're seen,
Mhm.
right, in having this described to you, and at the same time for you to see yourself as well. Like you're saying,
Mhm.
to look in a mirror, to really look yourself in the mirror in a way very closely that you normally from angles that you normally don't get to look at it from, right? And
Mhm.
then you have the authority to cultivate and or change those parts of you or work on those parts of yourself that are being brought to your attention, because oftentimes sometimes I hear people say, "Oh, I'm a Libra, so I can't make decisions." Like, no, it's not meant to be a crutch or a reason for.
This is not your get out of, yeah.
Yeah, it shouldn't be used in that way. It should be, okay, no, you know that that's how you are, so this is your ability to be able to work on that thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, not an excuse.
Well, I'm an Aries, I'm mad all the time. No, that is
No,
not an excuse. Your job, the reason why you're there is to learn how to channel energy
right.
and to learn how to stand up for listen to others instead of just traipsing all over them. And
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's more of how it should be or it can be utilized. And I find that a lot of people who are really into astrology, that's one of the things that they really like about it, is
Hmm.
that takes therapy, and not in place of, but like it kind of takes therapy and self-help to like a whole new level
Hmm.
as far as like self-assessment and working on yourself.
And it's interesting, before I ever applied astrology to myself, I had astrology books because it was a great way to craft a character,
Mhm.
to do kind of sort of a cookbook definition, but come up with a lot of consistencies.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was probably where I first started paying attention, not to charts necessarily. I didn't have that much understanding. And even now, when you look at a chart and you're like, oh, it's just what I see. What you're looking for when you talk to an astrologer is somebody who understands how the chart works,
Yes.
because it is a living document.
Yes.
And so not only is it changing, but also the what you see doesn't represent I'm trying to think what the name of that show was. Empire.
Boardwalk.
Yes, the Empire Boardwalk labyrinth beneath it of the power structures that are different for everyone.
Mhm.
But yes, to understand who, the ruler of your map is,
Yes.
that kind of thing. So these are things that we will talk about in the following episodes.
Episode 2 and
3 and 4.
3 and 4. And I think we're stopping at 4.
We'll get you through the next 4 weeks on astrology.
So join us next time as we talk more about astrology on All the Woo.
A to Z.